Hawkins, and I am so sad that I did not get to talk in person with Peter. So we were gonna break it down. I'm just sad I don't get to talk to anybody. I've spent the past 2 years only talking to my husband and son. But luckily I am an only child, so I have a lot of experience in talking to myself. I'm also sad that I didn't get to talk to Peter in person because it was so interesting to me listening to his journey and also to how he works on his books, because there are so many similarities and also those really interesting differences, which one of my favorite things to say is there's no right way to write a book. Nobody's journey is the same. And I think it's both a very cool and a very occasionally frustrating part of our business. So yes, I am Rachel Hawkins. I'm the author of The Wife Upstairs and Reckless Girls as adult thrillers. I also write romance under the name Erin Sterling. And so my book, The Ex-Hex, came out back in September. I'm just going to talk to you, sort of like Peter did, a little bit about sort of my journey to writerdom, as it were. And also specifically about the kind of formulation of Wife Upstairs, Reckless Girls, and a little bit about The Ex-Hex, because they're all such different books that all sort of came about in different ways. Like Peter, I too sort of became a writer via being a big reader as a kid. And I also, even before I could read, my joke is always that I was a writer or a reader before I could read and a writer before I could write, because I played really intense imaginary games, and Barbies were my Barbies, it was all going on. We had multi-character, multi-storyline, the thing where you have two Barbies acting something out and you're okay, you guys wait here, there's a commercial break, I'm gonna get these guys now we're back to the Blee plot. And so that kind of thing, and I think that that's such a big part of where writing actually starts, especially with kids, is in that sort of imaginative play. As I got older and got into reading, another big part and a big thing that I believe in is that nobody paid any attention to what I was reading, which is actually very freeing and important. If I could read it, then I could read it, and that was fine, which meant that, like Peter said, I was reading things also that were way above my age range, very young, but look at me now, so it's fine. It's fine, I promise you. I fell in love with a bunch of different books, so it makes sense that my own career has been slightly schizophrenic and I've written a bunch of different things. When I was probably about 12 or 13, I'll never forget, I was going on a school trip to Disney World, and my mom took me to Walden Books in the mall. Do you guys remember Walden Books? Pour one out for Walden Books. And she had told me, because it was going to be an 8-hour, I'm from Dothan, Alabama, so it was going to be about an 8-hour drive to Disney World. She was carte blanche in Walden Books, which, that's the dream. It's 1992, you're 12 years old, this is the best thing that's ever happened to you. And I remember going into Walden Books and going straight to the teen section, and where had been quite happy for a long time, reading Babysitter's Club and Sweet Valley High and Nancy Drew and Lois Duncan, who I never think gets enough love. And I went there, and I remember just blanking. It was I had read it all, basically. You have to understand too, in the early 90s, today, there's entire bookstores just for kids' books, but at this time, you really didn't have that much. And I'd sort of blown through all of it. And my mom, who wasn't a big reader, but who was very supportive of my reading, was maybe you read adult books now? I don't know. So she steered me over, and she didn't know where to put me on the adult fiction side. So she was well, romance, okay. But at this time too, romance novels were undergoing a particularly interesting transition, which is they were no longer the sort of shirtless guy on horseback and rainbows metaphorically being there in the background and bosoms heaving and all that. There was none of that. They were just very calm, sort of pastel with a locket on them. And this was great because it meant that your mom didn't know that they were still dirty books. So she's here's this one. It's got paisley and a ribbon on it. I'm sure it's fine. Also hilariously, and this just kills me. It's so my mom. She was she wanted to read the back of all of them though, to see, make sure the plots didn't seem too racy. But her thing was that, like, if it said anywhere on the back that the couple got married, couldn't have that one. Because she was like, if they're getting married as part of the plot, there's a higher percentage that there will be sex in this book. I get it, kind of. But it just meant that I read a lot of people having sex out of wedlock. The others were actually better when you think about it, Mom. So that was so I read a bunch, then I was all in. So it was Julie Garwood, and it was Jude Devereaux, and it was Judith Krantz, and it was all the good ones. Eventually it was Jackie Collins. Oh, Jackie. I still joke that that's who I really want to be. My hair's getting there today, at least. But in addition to all of that romance, I was also then consuming Stephen King and Dean Koontz and Mary Higgins Clark. Mary Higgins Clark, I went through like a huge stage in 7th grade where I had to read every single thing she'd ever written, which I was always that kind of kid, which turns out that was a sign of ADD. But where you're like, I like this one thing, I must have all of this one thing. And so all of these things were like always kind of mixing in my brain, and I like horror and fantasy and thrillers and romance, and I loved it all. I loved nonfiction. I loved true crime. I was just a really voracious reader. And so as I sort of grew up as a reader, and that's still in a lot of ways like how I tend to think more about my formation as a reader a lot of the time than I do even as my formation of a writer, because they were so intrinsically linked. But I was still kind of writing, and the thing is, when kids write, they write bad facsimiles of like the things that they're reading, which is good. That's part of like the stage, is basically the almost blatant plagiarism stage, where I was writing stories that were exactly like what I was reading. But eventually, as I sort of went on, and I was lucky to be very supported by teachers and by my family, I started writing original things. I won little contests in high school and things like that. But I still wasn't necessarily thinking about being a writer as a job. I didn't know any writers. Again, I was living in Dothan, Alabama. I'd seen one writer in my life, but it was a good one. It was Catherine Tucker Wyndham, who, yeah, see? I know I'm among my people when there's like a, oh. She signed a book for me. I actually still have it. I cut out the signing page and framed it in my office because it was such a big moment for me as a kid. But that was the only Alabama author I'd ever met or seen, so I never really thought about it. I went on to college. I got an English degree because why not? This was in the early 2000s when you could just get a degree in whatever and still get a job. And I eventually moved up to Huntsville with my husband and became a high school English teacher. I liked teaching. I liked kids and books. I didn't like grading things, bus line duty, all of it that wasn't kids and books. And around this time, this was kind of the mid-2000s, young adult literature was really exploding. This was sort of the post-Harry Potter, deep in the Twilight years. And because I was teaching, I was always reading up on YA and trying to keep my kids interested in it and what could I get in my classroom library, that kind of thing. And through that, I discovered YA as a genre. And all of a sudden, this writing part of my brain that had been asleep because I was very busy. I was teaching and going to grad school and having a baby and doing all this. And I got married somewhere in there, don't worry. And I was, like I said, super busy. But all of a sudden, I was like, oh, these are fun. I want to do this. I want to write this kind of book. And I knew what my kids liked, and I knew what I was enjoying. And so I sat down, and I basically was like, I'm going to write everything I enjoy. It's the kitchen sink book. It's whatever I like, it goes in here. And that turned into a book called Hex Hall, which was my first novel. I was extremely lucky in how quickly my publishing process worked, but again, as I said, I was writing paranormal YA at a time when paranormal YA was selling thousands and thousands and millions of copies. So it was a very right time, right place. I didn't know anybody. I didn't go to any writing conferences. I literally wrote my first book on a folding table in a bedroom in Harvest, Alabama. And then started Googling how to get literary agent. But it worked, and it worked because I really did do a lot of homework on, like, no, really, how do you get a literary agent? And I'm very lucky that that particular agent is still my agent today. So I always say that was one of my luckiest breaks, was finding the right person. So yeah, then I wrote young adult books for like 10 years, and that was really fun. I really enjoyed it. But after about book 11, I think it was, I started to it was like I was running out of ideas, which had not been a thing that had ever happened to me before. Like, the ideas were always there. The ideas are the easy part half the time. As Peter mentioned, like, people always kind of want to know, how did you get your ideas? That's usually, I don't have any trouble there. But this time I did. And I didn't know what kind of to do next. I was like pitching things to my editor, and she was kind of like, And, we'd worked together on several books, so that was very alarming. And it was around this time that a very interesting thing happened, which is that my agent forwarded me an email. And it was an email from a company that sort of puts together books. They're called a book packager. They're not a publisher. They come up with ideas, and then they find people to write them, and you work together to build a book, and then you sell it to a publisher. I had never worked with these kind of people before. They're great. Like, you guys would be shocked how many books you love come about in this particular way, which is why I like to be open about it and talk about it. And it was literally a paragraph, and it was like, we want to do modern Jane Eyre. Go. And my agent sent it to me, and she said, they're looking for somebody to do this. I know you've never written adult. I know you've never written thriller, but this book sounds absolutely bonkers, and you are that. So, do you want to try for this? And I said, okay, yeah. I've never done anything like this before in 10 years in publishing. But it was basically like I had to audition. So I had to write 10 pages of what my idea of a modern Jane Eyre would look like. And I remember talking to my husband about it, and I said, do you think that I should write the sort of safe version that I think is what they want? Or do you think I should write what I would really do if I were going to write this book? And he was like, oh, you've got to do what you would really do if you're going to write this book, because if they pick you, you're going to be writing this book, and also, go ahead and show them what you are and what you do, and if they don't like it, well, to hell with them, right? So, which is, everyone should get a man like that, or a woman like that, by the way. That's exactly the energy we require. So I did. I wrote these 10 pages, and at the end of it, I ended my sample on if you have read The Wife Upstairs, there is a slightly scandalous line in it that is a take on a very famous line from Jane Eyre. And that was how I ended my sample, with this kind of gauntlet thrown of a line, being like, is this what you want? And they said, yes. But then, that's all I had was this 10 pages. I went up to New York, and I met with these people. We sat in a conference room, and it was the most fascinating and interesting experience of my life to, build a book with other people. Writing is such a solitary thing. Like I said, all we had was modern Jane Eyre, and originally I think they had it set in, Connecticut. And one of the first things I said was that I was like, I've been to Connecticut, but I don't want to write a book set there. No offense, Connecticut. And one of the things, one of the guys was like, well, where are you from? I'm from Alabama. And he's like, you want to set it in Alabama? And I was like, oh yeah, I want to set it in Alabama. Now we're talking. And then we just sort of talked it out. It was a very collaborative experience. Every word of the book is mine. I wrote it. They just helped me plot it, basically, which was a really interesting experience. And then, so that was kind of how The Wife Upstairs was born. And I really had worried when I was working on it, because it had come to me as somebody else's idea, which again, I was like, I've never done that before. I've always written my own ideas. Would it feel like mine? And even though I knew I was writing all of it, and it absolutely did by the end of it. It was such a different process from anything I'd ever written before. And when we sold it to my publisher eventually bought a second book from me that had nothing to do with the people that made The Wife Upstairs. So it was like I was right back where I had normally been. So whereas Wife Upstairs came to me because people were like, hey, do you want to write this book? Reckless Girls is a book that I've been wanting to write since I was probably 12 years old, and is an idea that has been growing and building in my brain for 30 years. My dad was a big sailor. He was in the Navy, and so we had a little sailboat in Panama City when I was growing up. I really loved to sail. I mean, to sail. I loved to ride on a boat. What am I talking about? My dad is in heaven right now being like, you never sailed ever. So you just rode on the boat and you wouldn't put on your life jacket when I told you to. Sorry, Dad. My dad would never talk to me like that. He was super nice. But anyway, but I always loved like the culture around boats. I loved our boat was like in a little marina in Panama City. Interesting people would come in. It was just, there was something about it, and there was something to me about like the freedom of open water and all of that, with also like the inherent danger of open water. And that was always a thing that I was interested in. Also, I had read like I said, I was obsessed with all kinds of books, a true crime book, probably around the time I was 13, called And the Sea Will Tell by Vincent Bugliosi, who wrote Helter Skelter. Now, if you look up And the Sea Will Tell today, it's got a very classy black and white photo cover. No. The one that I got from the library was bright turquoise and had a skull on it. And that is the energy that I desire. Black and white classy stuff, come on. But it was fascinating. It's about these two couples, Mac and Muff Graham, literally those were their names, who were like rich retirees from San Diego who had sailed to this Palmyra atoll in the South Pacific. And when they got there, there was another boat sailed by these people trying to run from drug charges in Hawaii. And so you've got one boat full of rich people having a good time and one really crappy boat full of desperate criminals. And I think you can kind of guess what probably happened. But I thought that was so interesting because I was like, here, you've gone to paradise, but the flip side of paradise is that there is truly no one to hear you scream or no one to help you because you are very much on your own. And so that was always a story that I wanted to write. And so Reckless Girls kind of came out of that. And then when I was writing it, it turned out to also sort of be a story about class and about gender and about the haves and the have-nots and who gets away with things and who doesn't. And it turned into a much darker and sort of more feral book than I had intended. In the early writing process, there was a very clear crime that was going to happen. And then the more I got into it, the more I was like, no, this is a book about just what happens when really messy people all end up in one place and they're cut off from the rest of society. And what, to quote the real world, what happens when people stop being polite and start getting real and also homicidal. So that's sort of how Reckless Girls came about. And it's the book that I'm sort of the most happy to have written just because it feels like it lived inside me for such a long time. And it really became eventually the book that I really wanted it to be, which is always a very kind of freeing feeling. But like Peter said, that idea too was one that it was in my head. I thought about it. I added to it. I also don't write anything down for that exact same reason, which is that if I can't remember it, it's not worth it. The books that I'm going to write, that are actually going to be books, they are going to stick in my head. I will not be able to forget about them because I'll always be adding things to them. And so Reckless Girls has been probably building the longest out of all of my other books, and therefore is very special to me. And so I'm so excited that I've gotten a chance now finally to get out of my house and talk to people about it. So now, if you guys have any questions, I may or may not have answers. I hopefully will. I like this thing that we do where it's like Sally Jesse Raphael or Donahue.
How did you choose Mountain Brook?
How did I choose Mountain Brook? I'm not going to get tomatoes thrown at me, am I? No, so Mountain Brook I chose actually because I had a friend, when I knew that I was going to set it in Alabama, I knew that it needed to be in a upper class, wealthier enclave of Alabama. And I had a friend years ago who moved to Birmingham and moved to Mountain Brook from Las Vegas, and she had never been to Alabama. And she was shocked, and she told me that she was like, Rachel, because we'd been online friends, she was another writer. She was like, I just thought everybody from Alabama was like, I just thought it was gonna be like really salt of the earth types. And these ladies play tennis in pearls. And I was like, yeah, like every place has their enclave of that kind of thing. And it occurred to me too that like a lot of people might not know that. You know what I mean? Like, especially like in New York, like again, everybody was like, it was like I was Jane Goodall coming back from like the jungle. Like, here's my findings on the primates of Mountain Brook. Because they just like, that's just kind of how it is. So that was also sort of interesting to me to be like, no, like we can be just as rich and messy and all those things as anywhere else in this country. So yes, that was why Mountain Brook. Yeah, in the back.
How much input do you have when your book is made into an audiobook?
How much input do I have when my book is made into an audiobook? A little bit, by which I usually get auditions for the narrators, and then I listen to them and, pick which one I like, which is always awful because I want to give all of them jobs, So yeah, and especially like Reckless Girls, though, that one was one where I was like really careful about the narrator because there are like 50,000 accents in that book. I was not nice to the actor doing it. So that one I was like a little more involved because I was just like, there's so many accents that they've got to be able to do.
I listen to a lot of audiobooks, and I listened to The Wife Upstairs.
Yeah.
And because, and this probably happens in all of them, but because it was set here, like the narrator kept mispronouncing some of the names of the places.
Yeah.
Distracting, and I kept thinking, if that were my book, I'd probably be cringing.
Yeah, that's why I don't listen to them because of that, because there will be that thing, or like I'm always afraid, like sometimes like in the audition they will not have done a bad Southern accent, but when they get in the studio they got excited. So yeah, I never listen to them for that reason. It's funny too because like my producers who work on the audiobooks, they will sometimes like ask me for pronunciations for like in my like paranormal books, for like magical terms I've made up or whatever. No one ever asks about like, Opelika or whatever, so. But yeah, yes.
On X-Hex, why did you write under a pen name?
Okay, yes, so the X-Hex, my romance under a pen name, it is a very like boring businessy reason, but it was basically I sold that book to Avon after I'd sold The Wife Upstairs, but before it had come out. And so my publisher for Wife Upstairs was very much like, no, we have like Rachel Hawkins' adult debut, and they didn't want like that to get smoked, as it were. And so yeah, it was just that my Wife Upstairs publisher was like, can we please do a pen name? And Avon was like, yeah, that's fine. And so we just went with that. And also now I really like it because it just sort of keeps the streams separate. And it also means too that like sometimes people are really surprised to find out the same person wrote like this really fluffy Halloween rom-com and also like this fairly dark murder book. And I like to surprise people. I like to keep them on their toes. So yes, over here.
Have you ever considered writing humorous books?
Have I ever considered writing humorous books? I promise you, they are funny. All of my books are funny. Really dark humor, but it's in there, so. Oh, yes. Hi.
What are you working on now?
What am I working on now? Yes, I have just turned in 2 books, actually, within like 2 weeks of each other, which is why my brain leaks out my ears. My next thriller is tentatively called The Villa, but we haven't really settled on that yet. And that comes out in 2024, and it is There's a lot going on, but basically it's two old friends who go on a writing retreat at a villa in Italy, which was also the scene of a very famous murder in the 1970s, and those two stories begin to somewhat converge. It's also the most self-indulgent book I've ever written, because if you know the story of like how Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein, that she was a teenage girl in a villa in Switzerland actually with her then boyfriend and Lord Byron and all this, I basically took that story and was like, but what if they were 70s rock stars? And also one of them got murdered. So it's really kind of a fun book. And then I also just turned in the sequel to the X-Hex, The Kiss Curse, which will be out in September. So yeah, we're like companion novel. You know, I can't break up my couple from my first book. Okay, one more. Oh my gosh, this is so intense. So yes.
You just brought up the word sequel.
Yes.
So I was sitting here thinking or wondering if you were considering a sequel or a companion book to The Life Upstairs.
Yeah, a Wife Upstairs sequel. A lot of people ask about that, and not right now. I mean, I definitely like that ending is somewhat open-ended on purpose. But no, not for right now. I kind of like leaving everybody where they were. But I never say never. And I also like to sneak in references, like when you eventually read the next thriller, there's a very clear Easter egg to Reckless Girls in that one. So I like to sort of sneak other characters into my other books. So the Rachel Hawkins extended universe. So yeah, one more right here, yeah.
What was the quote that you, when you sent your 10 pages in?
They won't allow me to say the actual line that I wrote in the book, but it was a takeoff on the famous reader, I Married Him. We'll put it that way. And that's a perfect place to stop. Thank you so much.